Hello and welcome to the first Alnwick Castle Podcast of 2024. I'm Deborah Beecroft.
And I'm Daniel Watkins.
And on today's episode, we're going back to 1650 and the aftermath of the Battle of Dunbar in September of that year. When Oliver Cromwell's forces defeated the Scottish army loyal to King Charles II, thousands of them were taken prisoner and marched from Dunbar to Durham, a distance of about 90 miles. On the way, they were camped overnight at Alnwick Castle betwixt the middle and upper gate, according to a source from that time.
To find out more about the prisoners, who they were, their connection to the castle, and what happened to them afterwards, we spoke to Megan Olshefski. Currently a PhD research student in the Department of Archaeology at Durham University, Megan's work has been exploring the development of identity, memory and heritage within surviving groups of the Dunbar prisoners of war. Last year she also made the news when she embarked on a walking journey that retraced the route the soldiers would have taken in 1650 from Dunbar to Durham. It's a project that she hopes to turn into a book in the next few years. Like them, she also camped at Alnwick Castle for a night.
Here is our conversation with Megan. We hope you enjoy it.
We're very happy to be joined on the Alnwick Castle podcast today by the researcher, scholar and filmmaker Megan Olshefski. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm doing well. Happy to be back up at Alnwick Castle, but this time kind of under different circumstances than the last time I was here.
Yeah, you've got quite a unique connection to the castle in that you camped overnight in these walls last September. Not many people have been able to do that. So how was that? How did that come about? What was it like to camp out in a castle?
Well, I want to say it was the most unique experience probably that I've had in quite a long time. It was really a special experience, and I mean, it's a beautiful setting, Alnwick Castle itself, but to camp there was really just unreal, to put it plain and simply. I mean, the hospitality and generosity shown by the entire team here at the castle was unmatched, and it was just a wonderful experience, and I'm really still at a loss for words, still processing the whole experience myself, I think.
And can you tell our listeners why you came to camp at Alnwick Castle and what was it for?
Yeah, so it's a bit unusual, but I was recreating a forced march of some Scottish prisoners of war who were captured in 1650 by Oliver Cromwell at Dunbar. And in 1650, at the beginning of September, they were marched south to Durham, and Alnwick was one of the stops along the way. And so the Scots prisoners were imprisoned within the walls of Alnwick Castle. And so this project for me, as I was recreating this forced march, I was trying to stay in the same locations where all the Scots were housed at overnight, Alnwick Castle being one of them. And so kindly, the castle allowed me to camp within the walls on the very grounds where the Scots were camped at.
How long did your march take? Because you weren't forced. You could go at your own pace, I'm guessing.
Yes, well, I wish I went at my own pace, actually. So for me, I wanted to actually try to maintain the same pace that they had. Sort of a study, in a way, would it have actually been possible for them to complete the march in the amount of time that we have mentioned in historic documents. And so we have them stopping at a location each night. I wanted to test that myself. And granted, you know, I'm not starved. I was not starved. I was not battle weary or anything. And so I set out at their pace and was actually able to successfully maintain that pace, albeit it was very challenging at times. And so it took me about a week to complete. So I set off on September 3rd, the anniversary of the battle, set off from Dunbar, and then was able to stop in a location every night from there until I reached Durham. So the one day, though, where I went off route, I guess, was the day they went from Dunbar to Berwick in one day. So they were marched overnight after their capture. And I figured, you know, I really don't want to march through the night myself. So I split up that day, actually. So I possibly have one extra day on them. But then again, you know, the historic records themselves, you know, are vague in some areas. So we don't know. So maybe I ended up in Durham at the same time they did, or, you know, a day after or a day before, who knows. So.
Yeah, and as you say, they were battle weary, so they may not have been as quick as has been suggested.
Exactly. But yeah, it was important to me to set off on the anniversary so that way I had the same amount of daylight that they would have had, actually. And so I soon realized that I had to wake up, break down camp right before sunrise, and then try to get camp set up right before sunset. And so that was a good amount of time just walking throughout the entire day, trying not to take very long breaks as much as I wanted to at times. But so it's feasible, but yeah, we don't know the finer details as to how long they were at some locations.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you were in Berwick. Obviously, you stayed over at Alnwick Castle. You got as far as Durham, but where did the walk actually take you in terms of the overnight stays and where the prisoners would have been?
Yeah, so the first day, of course, was Dunbar, and we ended up actually attending a really wonderful remembrance ceremony at Spot Church, which is just by the battlefield, and where there is believed to be a mass grave, actually, of those who didn't survive the Battle of Dunbar. And there was a beautiful wreath-laying ceremony that took place there, and led by one of my colleagues, the battlefield historian, Dr. Aaron Johnston. Dunbar to Berwick, and wild camped in Scotland, and then continued on to Berwick. After Berwick, they went on to Belford, and then Belford to Alnwick, Alnwick to Morpeth, Morpeth to Newcastle, and then Newcastle to Durham. So all within a day's journey. all stops were within a day's journey. And out of all the stops, my stay at Alnwick Castle was actually the closest I came to camping at the same grounds where the Scots were housed. So that's what makes the stay at Alnwick Castle all the more special. In Morpeth, for example, we believe that they were housed within the possibly walled gardens at Morpeth Castle. But today, all that remains really of Morpeth Castle is a large gatehouse. But I was really kindly welcomed into Morpeth by some community members who live on the former castle grounds. And so I was able to camp in their garden, which, is really a wonderful story in itself to be welcomed in with, such kindness. And they ended up putting me in touch with a friend of theirs in Newcastle. I camped in their garden as well. So, yeah. But I think that's something to add on is, the fact that what was so special about this project, really, and I didn't anticipate at all, was the generosity and the hospitality and the interest by everyone I met along the way. I came across some individuals who knew the story of the Scots and then some who hadn't even heard of the story before. So it was really that was perhaps one of the most moving parts of the walk, was just all the interest and support that I received, may it be from offers of food and supplies or gardens to camp in, or just through the messages that I received that really kept me going each day.
Do we know why they were being marched from Dunbar down to Durham? What was the reason for going all of this way?
Yeah, so there were about 4,000 Scots that we estimate who were captured at Dunbar by Oliver Cromwell and sent on this forced march. You have 4,000 individuals at this period of time, and you need a place to house them, ultimately. Cromwell saw the value in these men for forced labor projects. He sent a group of them to the American colonies at that time, which the English were starting to establish, so he needed a labor force. So basically, you have 4,000 individuals. You need a place to house them. The largest building, an empty structure at this point in time, close to Dunbar, is Durham Cathedral. And so Cromwell knew, well, Durham Cathedral is currently not being used as a religious site or anything. It's an empty building. We're going to house the Scots prisoners in those walls. And so that was why they were sent to Durham.
And how do we know that they came to stay at Alnwick?
Yeah, so there's actually a really great archival letter here at Alnwick Castle in the archives, written on September 11th, 1650, by a man named Robert Watson, who was the Earl of Northumberland's officers at Alnwick Castle. He was actually writing to his colleague Hugh Potter, who was the Earl's steward, possibly at the Northumberland House in London. And so he actually Robert wrote to Hugh, stating that there were about 6,000 Scots prisoners who were housed within the walls here at Alnwick Castle, and even informed that the rest of the Scots army had deserted Edinburgh following the Battle of Dunbar and retreated to Stirling. And so Robert's note of 6,000 Scots is interesting because right now we estimate that there were 4,000 Scots who left Dunbar and only about 3,000 who made it to Durham Cathedral. But think we have to look at this in sort of the point of view of Robert Watson. Who knows how often he saw large groups of people at this period of time? Even, anyone in the villages surrounding the area, to see this huge column of men walking down the main road at the time. You likely wouldn't have been able to comprehend the sheer number of individuals. And so he was giving a good estimate, I think, as best he could. Yeah.
And do we know why only 3,000 arrived at Durham?
Yeah, so we don't know exactly why or even what happened to those 1,000 who we estimate were lost along the way. We don't know if they died in the march. We don't know how many escaped or anything. We do know the one record that we do have with some numbers associated with it is actually pertaining to Berwick, where this is the first point where the Scots come into, it's the end of the first day of the march, and they come into Berwick, and 30 are actually killed then and there after they refused to move any further. And we also know that some escaped into southern Scotland just before they reached Berwick. So that's really the only point where we have an idea of numbers or of those lost along the way. Otherwise, there's quite a few of them who sort of disappear into the fog of history.
But the 3,000 that are left, they get to Durham. They've gone from Dunbar to Berwick to Alnwick and then further down. Durham, I'm guessing, was the end of your recreation. But for these 3,000 men, it didn't stop when they arrived at Durham Cathedral. Can you tell us what happened to them afterwards and how much nicer it maybe was when you got to there?
So once the Scots reached Durham Cathedral, like I said, we estimate around 3,000 entered the cathedral. And by the end of their stay or their imprisonment in the cathedral, 1,500, we estimate, actually left the cathedral. So 1,500 sadly died during their imprisonment. And that group of individuals are buried under Palace Green in Durham, which the mass grave was discovered during some building works in 2013. Guess we can discuss more on that later, maybe. But for those who survived, they were shipped, some of them were shipped to the American colonies. So we know 150 were shipped aboard a vessel named the Unity. And they were shipped to New England, and from there they served out periods of indenture within Massachusetts Bay Colony at this time. And then they end up living out their lives in New England after the period of indenture. So the period of forced labor was only 5 to 7 years. So it's very different from slavery in that regards, in that it's for a set period of time, it's not for life. So I like to kind of clearly state, there's a difference between slavery and indentured servitude. Additionally, this status is not passed on to any children of yours. So after their indenture, they ended up, many of them acquired parcels of land in New England and lived out the rest of their days on this land, and actually likely did far better for themselves than if they had returned to Scotland at this point in time. And as far as we know, none of them actually ever returned to Scotland. So this is a group of men who are all ranging in the age range of 15 to 25. So they're just, they say goodbye to Scotland and family and friends there and end up establishing their lives in America at that point.
And how about you when you arrived in Durham? What was it like finishing?
It was, I recognize it was a very different experience from likely what the Scots experienced. Because to me, Durham is now home. And so for me, it was very emotional because I knew, I finally made it. I made it home. The comforts of home awaited, a nice shower, a bed. But it was actually really moving in that a group of community members and colleagues and friends all gathered at the Durham Cathedral's north door in a welcoming ceremony. And the mayor of Durham showed up, gave a nice speech, and then members of the Durham Cathedral community as well welcomed me, along with Durham Rotary Club members who provided some sponsorship for the walk, as well as Dunbar Rotary members came down from Dunbar, and other community members from Dunbar came down. And luckily, they drove, they didn't walk. So yeah, it was really a moving experience for me to see the impact that this story had on the surrounding community, on so many individuals and people from all walks of life, and to be welcomed into the cathedral, and then led to the memorial plaque that's within the cathedral in honor of the Scots, where we then had a moment of silence, and we were led in a very beautiful Scottish prayer as well. So it was really touching, and I think, very honoring and appropriate way to it was an appropriate way to honor the Scots, I believe.
Mm-hmm. What is it about this point of history that interests you so much to want to do this walk?
Yeah, I get asked that question quite a few times, and you would think I would have a good answer at this point. I sort of stumbled upon this story. Back in 2017, I was working as a researcher and producer for the Ancestry program, Who Do You Think You Are? Mm-hmm. And one day I walked into the studio and I was handed my next assignment, and it was, the story of one of these Scotsmen. And so I had to conduct all the research and arrange filming and interview locations and scouting locations, all that around the story. And I just became so intrigued by the story, by the story of human determination and grit, and just that these young men, these boys, really, the world was against them at this point. All the odds were stacked against them, but a group of them, they were able to overcome it. And I think it's just a really unique story. And since then, there's been, as all research goes, more questions come up than answers often. So as I've been continuing my research on them, there's more and more questions that come up. And for me, one question was always, who were these 1,000 men who disappeared along the march? I've been able to track down many of the Scots who end up in the American colonies. I know them by name. I've located them in historic records, really learned their personalities, and sort of have come to know them in a strange way. But this 1,000, they're nameless. They're just a number, and not a singular number either. It's just a group of them. And so I've always been curious as to, well, how can I honor them? How can I get to know them in a way? And so that's what really, that's always been in the back of my mind for the last few years as I researched the story. And yeah, figured, what? I might as well do it.
Do you think it brought you closer to how those missing 1,000 felt? Did you get a sense of them as you were doing it?
Yeah. So, there's definitely many aspects of their life that I would never be able to relate to or anything, of course. And, for one, there were many alterations I made to the walk along the way for health and safety reasons. So the Scots, for example, did not eat until at least day 4 of the walk. Many of them hadn't eaten before the battle, even. I decided not to go the starvation route at all. And I sort of altered the route just a bit because the main path now is that they would have taken is today the A1. So I didn't really want to walk down the main motorway between London and Edinburgh. So I tried to work my way down as closely to the A1 as possible, and told myself, okay, the Scots, we know, walked about 90 miles. As long as I reached 90 miles, I'm good. And I did 94.5 miles. And so I think it did bring me closer to them in a way. There were a lot of moments of deep inner self-reflection, and sort of some moments where through the struggle to kind of just keep one foot in front of the next at times, I sort of just found myself thinking back onto, well, think about, what they went through, and think of those who I do know by name, and just know it's the same landscape I'm walking through, and that this is for them in a way. So that sort of really kept me going. But then about halfway on the walk as well, what was really interesting is I started receiving messages from descendants of the survivors. Word finally reached the States by that point, and there's a very strong descendant community of the survivors, and they're very passionate about their family history, and they're 10 to 12 generations removed from these Scottish prisoners at this point, but they're really inspired by their own family history. And so I started receiving messages of support and encouragement, and that was that was really moving to me. I'm trying not to tear up right now thinking about it. But that to me sort of symbolized, okay, they're all with me in a strange way. And I don't know, how much we want to get into kind of spiritualism or anything like that on this podcast. But yeah, it was encouraging. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Obviously, you've mentioned these descendants. What records are there in terms of the prisoners themselves, of how we know who they are, that you've been able to find?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak on, in the case of the Scots who ended up in the American colonies. So at this point in time, as the colonies are being established, there's extensive records being kept and extensive court cases. I mean, in court at that time, yes, you would be in court for any misdemeanors or crimes committed, but also for things such as land transactions, possibly. So we have a lot of land records, but it was really through the court cases, the court records from this time, that I was able to really get glimpses of their personalities. And so actually there's one Scot by the name of George Darling who sort of becomes an older brother or father figure to many of these Scots, because at the time of capture, he's in his late 20s, early 30s, I estimate. And so much older than the majority of the others who are much younger. And after their period of indenture, he goes and he establishes his own tavern, and it becomes sort of a hub for the other Scots and, of course, other community members to come hang out at. And you consistently see George Darling appearing in court for fights that break out in his tavern that sometimes involve some of the younger Scots. And you can see him say, yes, I'm sorry the fight broke out. I'll keep them underhand next time. You can just imagine then when he goes back to the tavern and what he might say to the younger Scots at that point. But these key characters start appearing in the records. There's many, of course, who you get one glimpse of them throughout their entire lifetime, and that's it. But others, if they become prominent members in the community, there's a lot out there on them. Additionally, other great historic records for us are their inventories or wills when they pass. And what's really shocking is that they actually most of them live to very respectable old age, some well into their 80s and 90s. And so we have these inventories of their estates at the time of their passing. And what's interesting is actually on some of these records, you actually have listed some of the other Scots who are helping out with the appraisal of the estates, essentially. So that shows us, they're staying in contact with each other. And then we know from some of the land records where they settled, where they ended up establishing themselves in their homesteads. And some of them were next door neighbors, and they established little communities. And basically they became a band of brothers during this journey, and they stick together till the end of their days.
We should probably go back to some of the people who sadly didn't get to go into old age. And you mentioned it before, the mass grave that was found in Durham in 2013. What can you tell us about that discovery and the work that's gone on since to find out who those people were?
So in 2013, there were building works taking place, building a new cafe for Palace Green Library at Durham University. And during this point in time, they discovered human remains, skeletal remains. And at this point in time, construction came to a halt, and the archaeological excavation took place of these skeletal remains. And it was discovered through archaeological research and the evidence that these skeletons were from the Battle of Dunbar and were the Scots prisoners. And so it was through a whole combination of archaeological evidence, historical, documentary evidence, that was all pieced together to come to the conclusion that the skeletons excavated were from Dunbar, from the Battle of Dunbar, and they were the Scottish prisoners. And so since 2013, much has transpired since then. So my current PhD supervisor at Durham University, Professor Chris Gerard, was sort of the lead on the Scottish Soldiers Project at that time, as it's been dubbed. And since then, Professor Gerard and other of our colleagues at Durham University have published sort of the leading book on the topic right now, called Lost Lives, New Voices. And that was published in 2018. Now, I came onto the scene to all this research in 2017 through my involvement with Who Do You Think You Are? And since then, I've continued research on the Scots under Professor Gerard's supervision. And right now we've been focusing on looking at the Scots in the American colonies, those who survived, looking at did they maintain a Scottish identity through archaeological evidence that remains today. And there's plans for future projects as well, pending funding and everything. So we were hoping for a few grants possibly to come through. And we're also curious taking the next step in our research in looking at the environmental impact the Scottish prisoners had on the landscape in the American colonies. So there's many new things coming up and exciting research to be done. It's never ending.
And is much known about the 1,500 who survived Durham, who weren't part of this mass grave? Do we know what happened to them afterwards?
Yes. So the others who survived the imprisonment, so 150 of them were shipped to the American colonies. There was a group of them actually sent down to southern England to drain the fens, which was a very grueling and physically demanding task. We also know that some remained in the area in the northeast as well for various different labor projects. And then there is some word that some of them might have gone on to France to fight against the French. But as far as we know, we cannot say one way or another if any ever went back to Scotland.
So you've been looking into these lives through not just retracing the steps, but by looking at all the evidence as well. What's been the most interesting aspect for you? What's been your way in, and where do you want to go next in terms of finding out more?
I could definitely speak on one of the most moving moments, for sure. Definitely coming to get to know the Scots through the historical records and realizing, there's so much we can tell about an individual who lived, nearly 4 centuries ago, and learn about their lives. But perhaps something that's been very moving to me is actually I've been out to now the land where they settled in the American colonies. Today in the states of Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island predominantly, and I've surveyed some of the land that they lived on, the land that hasn't been heavily developed upon, and have actually come across some of the family burials from that time period, and have located some gravestones that are likely associated with the Scots prisoners. And I think perhaps one of the most moving moments is, aside from the walk itself really, was standing at these gravestones and realizing this is the end of their journey. And for many years, I was just chasing their shadows through the documentary evidence. And then finally, I was sort of coming face to face, if you will, with them, and sort of coming to the end point of their journey. And it was a beautiful moment to experience.
It's a long way from Dunbar.
Very long way. Yes, yes. There's a joke that now I need to get on a boat and go across the Atlantic now after the walk. But,
well, I was just going to say, how long would it have taken them to get to New England?
Yes, so it actually didn't take them as long as we would have expected for that time period. So this group of 150 who were shipped on the Unity, they left in November, and then we have record of them arriving in Boston, kind of late December, early January time frame. So the currents were definitely in their favor at that point, but it would have been many months. So just you're stuck on a boat. If you think kind of the long haul flights nowadays are bad, you would be stuck on a ship for many, many months.
So where can people go if they want to find out more about the Dunbar prisoners? We've got the connection here at the castle. There's connections down in Durham, but where should people go to investigate if they want to see more about them?
So there's a great website that's been established by some of the descendants of the Scots, and it's basically spows.org. And on that page, it's maintained by researchers within the descendant community, pulling together research conducted by those outside researchers as well as the academics at Durham University. But they have profiles built for many of these individuals who we know by name. So that's a wonderful resource. There's additionally a Scottish Prisoners of War descendant Facebook group that is well within the thousands of numbers. And it's a very active community. If anyone is struggling to conduct any research, they really encourage you to post, about your ancestor or, a query on the Facebook page. And, as well as our research taking place at Durham University, would love to maybe establish a web page for any future research coming up. So that's coming soon. It's currently, don't have it up right now or anything. But then also you can follow along on my Twitter account. I'm frequently posting any sort of new research discoveries or ventures on there. And that's just at Megan Olshefski.
Will you be doing the walk again next year?
I haven't been asked that yet. I would say I would happily drive the route again, or even cycle it. But at this point, no, I'm not. I don't think I'm ready to undertake that walk again. As moving as it was, I would say it was the most physically, emotionally, and mentally demanding trek I've ever undertaken. Well worth it. Definitely, but still processing, still much more to come, I'm sure. But yeah, perhaps next year I'll still make a trip up to Dunbar, at least visit the community there, try to continue the story and through some way of honoring the Scots at the anniversary in some way or shape. But I won't be taking a walk next year. Maybe in a few years' time, we'll see.
Well, Megan, thank you very much for coming back to Alnwick without your tent this time and joining us on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been such a joy and a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. If you'd like to find out more about the Battle of Dunbar and the prisoners of war, please look online for the Durham University Scottish Soldiers Project, as well as the websites Megan suggested.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Alnwick Castle Podcast. If you did, please recommend us to your friends, leave us a positive review or rating wherever you can.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode for you. Until then, I've been Deborah.
And I've been Daniel.
Thank you very much for listening and goodbye.
Bye.